Do you ever feel a thrill when the sun sets just a little bit too early, or when the woods get just a bit too quiet? Our author has mastered the art of blending horror with humanity, set against the eerie beauty of Canada's northern landscapes. So today we're going to dive into his world where tree planters and cowboys face monstrous creatures and uncover the raw, rugged inspiration behind his brand new collection, captivating readers and reminding us all of what lurks in the shadows and perhaps within us. This interview will leave you seeing the woods in a whole new way. Don't go away. We'll be right back with Writer's Corner live show.
Imagine a world where the lines of reality blur with the fantastical. Embark on journeys from humble beginnings to the pinnacles of literary greatness. On the Writer's Corner, we delve into the lives of unique wordsmiths, known for their compelling storytelling. They are artisans who craft fantastical realms, etched in our memory long after the final page is turned. Every tale begins with a single word, a single idea. Authors create sensations that keep you on the edge of your seat. Witness how they transform setbacks into stepping stones, use refusals to spark growth and turn rejections into catalysts for new inspiration. Witness the diversity in writing as it gives birth to a vast array of genres, from drama to mystery to children's stories, fantasy, and reality. Join us as we uncover sources of inspiration and the magic that defines the author's craft. Find out how authors breathe life into their characters and meticulously craft narratives and plots that captivate readers. Get a sneak peek into upcoming works, and join us as we celebrate literary greatness, only on the Writer's Corner. We don't just celebrate best-selling Amazon and New York Times authors, but also indie authors. Join us on the journey from the birth of a tale to the creation of a masterpiece, only on the Writer's Corner live show. Stay tuned.
If you've just joined us, then welcome to the Writer's Corner live show. If you're not yet following us on our social media channels, please do, because that way you'll get notified when we go live. If you haven't met me yet, I'm Bridgetti Lim Banda from Cape Town in South Africa, and in today's show, we're going to be talking to Joel McKay. Our live stream is made possible by Creative Edge, StreamYard, and Be Live Media. Mary Elizabeth Jackson and I have been doing the show for over 6 years, and unfortunately today she is unable to join us, but she'll be back next week again. Now, if you haven't met Joel McKay, he is an award-winning author whose stories are steeped in the landscapes and lure of northern British Columbia. With a passion for Canada's history and the tales of untamed wilderness, Joel's work explores the dark and fascinating intersections of humanity, horror, and nature. His novella, Wolf at the Door, earned the 2022 Global Book Award Gold Medal for Horror, and his latest collection, It Came from the Trees and Other Violent Aberrations, which we'll be talking about today, continues his journey into the chilling world of the supernatural pulp fiction. We're not writing, Joel tells us he's an economic development professional drawing on years of experience in public relations and journalism that have earned him accolades at the national, provincial, and local level. So without any further ado, let's welcome Joel to join me on the show. Joel, welcome to the Writer's Corner live show. Great to have you in the studio with us.
Good morning, Bridgetti. It's great to be back.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to jump right in because, as we know, the 30 minutes go by so super quickly.
Yeah,
and
they do.
I want to get as much information out about your journey and, of course, your latest book as is possible. So I'm going to dive right in. How do the landscapes of northern British Columbia shape your approach to horror storytelling?
I think that there's a couple of things. I think one of them is sort of the culture. Sparse populations in northern British Columbia. It's an area the size of France. We only have, 350,000 people here. So, it is an area that is, in some cases, feels empty, but is anything but. It's just a lot of small towns and communities and characters. And then you have extreme conditions. So there are distances between places, vast wildernesses that in some cases people have never been into or not into very often. And we have extreme temperatures. So, in the winter, it can easily be minus 45 or as cold as minus 50. And in the summer, it can get up to 40 degrees above zero. So you go from blizzards and extreme conditions where the air is trying to kill you to hot, sometimes humid or dry, depending on where you are, sparsely populated, based on industry, not that different than parts of South Africa where, mining and forestry and other things are really, really important to smaller communities. And that, to me, creates an environment that is really ripe and rich for stories. There's a lot of fiction out there about things happening in big cities, things happening in well-populated areas. I think that what I'm able to bring to the table is stories that are based in the authentic Canadian North, which is and can be a spooky place at times, especially here in British Columbia.
Well, I must tell you, I have family in Canada as well, and I don't think I'd survive the kind of weather that you guys are used to there. It really is extreme.
It is. It's I'm originally from Vancouver, which doesn't really get winter. It just gets cold and rainy in certain times of the year. And I moved up here about 12 years ago, and I had to adjust to the winters. There's no question about it. But you get used to it, and you actually grow to love it. I think what a lot of people don't know is that it's not like winter 10 months of the year. It's like 5 months of the year. And actually, it's not always minus 50 and blowing snow, right? Like there's a lot of days where you're above freezing even in the winter. And then the rest of the year, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's green. It's verdant. It's hot. You get to go swimming in the lakes and other things. So it's extreme. There's no question, but it's lovely too.
Oh, it absolutely is. Absolutely no doubt about that. And talking about extreme, it came from trees. Your characters confront forces beyond their control.
Yes.
What would you say do these encounters reveal about the resilience or fragility of human nature?
I think both. I think in each case, in the title story, it came from the trees. It's based on a group of young tree planters who come across a parasitic beetle that begins to, for lack of a better term, to not give it away, infect them. And what happens in the story is, I think, what generally happens in extreme scenarios where some people step up and some don't. And that's that sort of piece you're talking about where there's resiliency versus fragility. And often, I think, and you see this played out in the story, is the people who you don't think are going to be that resilient end up stepping up. And the people who are loudmouths end up being quite fragile. And so it definitely reveals that. And I think horror is a unique literary pursuit, for lack of a better term, for actually exploring that very conversation, because you're putting extreme conflict and situations out there that characters are then forced to react to. And that gives you really wealthy ground, I think, to explore the range of emotions that people go through and how their actions then play out for good or ill in a story. So I think in that way, I'm able to, through some of these external supernatural forces, really unpack, what happens to people when they find themselves in something that's unexplainable.
Yeah. Now, Wolf at the Door did really, really well. Mm-hmm. How did the process of writing short stories for this collection differ from writing Wolf at the Door?
You know what? It was much harder. for me. It was Wolf at the Door. I actually wrote the first draft of that in about 3 weeks. And these stories, there's only 5 of them in this collection, but it was probably about a period of 4.5 years, from when I wrote the first story to when I wrote the last one, and then finally made the decision to pull them together and get them out there. Short fiction, I love. I've been a reader of it all my life, but I find it incredibly difficult to create. And so I took my time with it in a way that I didn't with Wolf at the Door. I think in some cases too, as a creator, like Wolf at the Door was almost fully formed when it came into my head. I knew what it was. It's a 2-act story. I knew the tone. I knew the character types. Like you have that sometimes as a creator where it just hits you like a bolt of lightning. In these stories, it wasn't the case. The title story, it came from the trees. I wrote 5 years ago, on a writing getaway at a cabin by myself, and I didn't like it the first time. I thought I really mucked it up. I wrote it from a different point of view, and I stuck it in a shelf for about 3.5 years. And then I went back to it and I gave it a read, and I was like, actually, there's something like sort of manageable here that I could work on and pull out of it. So each of these stories is very different and has its own sort of origin story. And that was one of the reasons between each story that I also put author notes in about the story. I like that as a reader. I like getting a sense of what was going through the author's head when they were writing an anthology or a short story in particular, more so than a novel. And so I did that with each story. There's in the book, there's about 500-600 words right afterwards around sort of what was going on with me at the time when I wrote it, what I was thinking about, or what I might have been struggling with.
Wow, very, very interesting. And I like that you've done that. What is it that drew you to supernatural horror over other genres, and were there any unique challenges for you in this genre?
Yeah, so I'm a reader of fantasy first and foremost. As a kid, that's what I started reading, and then when I started writing when I was 12, it was all high fantasy, but always with a darker tone. There's always been a part of me that's really interested in the macabre and monster stories, and in horror. And as I grew into my adulthood, it wasn't a choice so much as it's where the ideas seemed to pop into my head. Was, oh, that would be a cool story. That would be a scary place to go. It was almost as if that's where I want to escape to. And there's a lot of different types of horror too. There's slashers and creature features and all that other kind of stuff. But it's almost the tone and atmosphere that really is what brings me into horror. So there's times where I like cozy horror, and there's a cozy horror story in this book, which is The Silent Screamer. It's a bit Lovecraftian, but it's almost like a kid's adventure story. And it's horror, but it's not, it's not The Exorcist, and to sort of put a tone on it. And then there's other times where I do really like to get into the slasher. Wolf at the Door would be that, or body horror. It Came from the Trees. In terms of your question, like, what did I find challenging? Horror has it has a number of challenges with it. One of them is that you can think that the horror itself, whatever that is the conflict. And it isn't necessarily. Often the conflict is how the characters react to it, how they respond to it, how they change. And so you can't sort of lose yourself and get forgotten in the monsters, the spookiness, the hauntings at the expense of true human drama. So that remains the same in the genre, but I think there's a risk there when you get into it. It's like, well, I'll just throw a monster in the mix and that'll make this a good story. No, what makes the story compelling ultimately is the characters, the people, what they're going through, what they're struggling with, how they respond to things, whether the reader agrees with those things or not. And so, being cognizant of that risk, I think, is a key to, crafting something that somebody's actually going to finish, which is always the goal that I'm trying to to get the reader to. I think I can get you to start. What I'm really trying to get you to do is finish all the way through.
Yep, getting you to turn the page and just stay with the story. How do your character or your characters' flaws and fears enhance the suspense in the stories?
Yeah, well, with any type of character, usually what happens with a story for me is I'll have a place that I want to go or an idea that I want to explore. Maybe sometimes it is a creature that I want to get to, and then you got to create characters. You got to tell that story through somebody, right? And usually with the characters, I'm not particularly interested in what they look like or necessarily what they sound like. I'm interested in, what are they afraid of? What are they self-conscious about? What are they, who are they versus who do they want to be? And how does this story enhance those things? So those are the questions I'm trying to answer when I sketch something out. So you typically in my fiction, you won't find me spending 2 paragraphs describing the way somebody's hair is done or what they wear. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I say that because you'll find in my fiction what I'm really interested in is where their head is at. At that point in life, when we are meeting them, what are they struggling with? And then how does this situation bring that out and either force them to face it or to cower from it? And what does that ultimately reveal? And then what I'm particularly interested in is how do I get different people with different approaches facing the same situation? And Wolf at the Door is entirely that. It's a study of, a family, all with different backgrounds, different issues, different feelings towards one another, all gathered around a Thanksgiving dinner table, and then a werewolf shows up. And really the story is about watching how all of these people handle and react to it and interact with one another. The werewolf is almost beside the point. It's the external force. And It Came from the Trees is the same thing. It's another group of characters who are forced to deal with, in this case, a parasitic beetle. And they all, based on who they are, where they're at in their lives, they all react to that differently. And what I'm trying to do is connect with audience members who can see themselves or somebody they know in each of those characters and ask themselves the question of, would I do that in that situation, or would I do things differently? And I think if I'm able to pull that off, I'm not saying I did, but if I'm able to, then I think that becomes a really compelling story.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can you tell us about a moment when the real northern wilderness influenced a fictional setting in your work?
Yeah. So It Came from the Trees, it's set in a place about 2.5 hours northeast of the city that I live in, which is Prince George, which is actually about halfway up the province, even though we call this area northern BC. And it's a wilderness that is really, really dense. It's in the Rocky Mountain Trench, easy to get lost. Lots of stories of people getting lost or getting hurt or coming across large carnivores out in the woods in that area. The weather can often be extreme, and it's hard to get in and out of in that area. And I love that area. I've gone fishing in there and hiking in there lots over time. But I'm also, when you are outdoors, you learn really, really quickly, how quickly things can go sideways. And so I used that area as the basis, the real basis for where that story takes place. I needed a story that was, or a setting that was far enough out that it worked for the plot lines. A place where there's no cell coverage, sat phones don't really work. You're hours from a community. You're on roads that are rough. There's no street lights. There's no one's coming out to get you past dark. I needed that kind of setting, and we have a lot of those in northern British Columbia. So it was perfect. The second story in the mix is also set here, but it's right in the city, which is a bit different for me. The story is called A 21st Century D.B. Cooper, and it's actually hard science fiction thriller. So it's a bit of a different mix. But it's about a physicist who invents teleporter technology, and then the airline industry that wants it to be ended or destroyed, and him along with it. And the physicist is a professor at a small university, which is what we have here in Prince George. And it's the middle of winter, and he has to sort of battle and contend with trying to get down to the big city to unveil this technology in the middle of winter, while the airline industry that he has to fly on to get down there is trying to put an end to what he's doing. And so that is set right here in Prince George. And the geography of the place, what it's like, the drive to the airport, all those things figured pretty largely in the story.
Nice. I really like that. I really like that. And what do you hope readers would take away from the tension between the natural and supernatural elements in your stories?
Well, in a strange way, I hope that they take away that there actually isn't much separation between the two. If you spend a lot of time in the wilderness, you do tend, at least my experience has been, and other people I've been around, I'm not an overly religious person, but I'm definitely a spiritual one. And I find that when you are out in the wilderness, you tend to listen to that side of yourself more, I think, naturally. I think we all do. Whatever we call it, however we describe it, there is a spirituality to being in the wilderness. And that spirituality invites in the supernatural. And that's always been the case for me here in British Columbia. You know, our tourism brand as a province is Supernatural British Columbia. And a lot of that is based around this notion of our colossal landscapes, mountains, oceans, rivers. You know, British Columbia is an incredible place that people come to from all over the world to see and visit and experience. But me, being the dark fiction writer, I always took supernatural as that spiritual part. And so that's what I'm playing into here. And my experience has been that there, you know, between the landscape and how you feel about it, how you experience it, how it allows you to reflect on your place or where you're going in your life, there isn't much separation. And so through my fiction, I'm able to tell monster stories, which I love. I'm always going to do that. But I'm really able to, I think, thread together that supernatural element with the landscape and hopefully, you know, pass on the message that I don't think these two things really are separate. I think they go one and together. And I think that that's a really cool way to live life. And so hopefully that comes across to readers.
Awesome. Do you have a copy of the book close by any chance?
I do, right here.
Awesome. Wonderful. Tell us a little bit about that cover. I'm always intrigued to know how people decided on the cover.
Yeah, so this cover was actually designed by Keelan Patrick Burke, who is a very accomplished horror author himself, and also an artist. And so I reached out to Keelan and I said, hey, like I'm looking for a cover here that really captures what I'm trying to do. I like your artwork, and would you be willing to work with me? And he jumped on it. So we did the cover artwork and I loved it. It's got a beetle on it. It's dark. It captures the woods. It really is got that pulpy feel to it, which I was trying to get across in this book. But we went a step further. And I said, hey, would you be open to doing an illustration for each story inside the book? And so, which is kind of an old-timey pulp fiction thing to do, something you would find at a spin rack in the 70s or 80s, where you've got kind of a cool little pencil drawing with each story. And so we did. So each story has its own little pencil drawing. And I can give you a sense of, there's one of them to start off the story, The Silent Screamer. And so Keelan did all of those as well. And I think that just adds a different layer and texture to the book itself. You know, books as mediums, not to get too esoteric about the whole thing, but it's not just the words on the page, it's the tangible side of it. It's the experience of opening the book and going through it. And I really wanted that to exist in this anthology. So that's why we have the artwork in the interior that we do, and author's notes, and the stories flow in a certain way too. I didn't just randomly put together. I thought about, you know, almost like when you're putting together an anthology, like how do you put together a music album so that the stories flow nicely? And that was all very, very intentional to give the reader a certain experience of a type of pulp fiction that is few and far between these days. And I hope it comes across.
Absolutely. And, I'm always fascinated to hear the sort of, because this is not something that people would know about the book or the cover. And I'm always fascinated how, it's very difficult for an author to put your ideas and thoughts to have someone else visualize what you're seeing in your head. And somehow these illustrators, a good illustrator does such a good job. And I think he's done a brilliant job of your cover of, putting it all into the picture.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. It is like that. It's a bit odd every time that you're giving your work over to somebody else and saying, "Okay, now go visualize this." One thing I've learned with it is that you have to trust it. Like, you can't be a perfectionist. If it's mostly grabbing the feeling that your story is, then I think you go with it, even if you're not like, I don't think you want to get nitpicky with a lot of the art as an author. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, because I also wouldn't want somebody to get nitpicky with the story necessarily, right? I think you have to trust what the artist creates in the way in which they do it, if it's mostly there. And what I found is that I like them more as time goes on. I like Keelan's work. I liked it in the beginning, and I like it more now. I'm quite proud of it. So if anybody's out there looking for a great artist, Keelan's the guy. And I would highly recommend you reach out to him.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. This was such, as I said to you in the beginning, 30 minutes go by so quickly. Won't you hold up your cover just one more time so people can take a quick look at that, how beautiful that cover is, and how well your illustrator did with that. So, thank you so much. It was wonderful being able to chat to you today, and I'm glad that we didn't have any. I was worried that we have some technical issues, but I'm glad that things have.
Yeah, it worked out. Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you too as well. Thank you for having me.
It's a big pleasure. We've just got a minute left now. Not all authors have a publicist. You do.
Yeah.
Tell me why you decided to have a publicist.
Because I'm not good at selling myself, and so I realized that I needed to do that to make a go of this, and I needed to find somebody who that's their job, and I needed to listen to them. And so I gave myself over to it and realized that, I have strengths in certain areas and not in others, and this is a business. And so I need to engage that expertise where I'm weaker as a professional. And so that's what I did. And so I reached out to Mickey Mickelson at Creative Edge. He's a fellow Canadian, very professional, and he's been looking after me for the last couple of years, and I have no complaints. It was a smart thing to do.
Well said, because I think a lot of new authors need to know that and need to hear that, because even if you are a great author, that doesn't make you good at marketing your books. They don't fly off the shelves by themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that articulates why, having a good publicist at your side is a good idea. Joel, thank you so much. We'd love to have you back on the show again anytime. This is your second time around on the show, and we definitely. What's next for you? Just real quick. We've got 30 seconds left.
I've got 2 novels that I'm editing now, full length. One is a high fantasy and one is horror. So look for those to be coming out over the next couple of years. That's what's next for me.
Fantastic. Joel, take care. It was great having you on the Writer's Corner. Thank you for joining us on the Writer's Corner live show. 30 minutes of insightful author conversations with some of the biggest names in the industry, including award-winning authors and international indie sensations. Join us on the next episode of the Writer's Corner live show.